MacVoices is sponsored by lynda.com. Expand your skills, improve yourself. Get a free 10-day trial of all lynda.com has to offer at lynda.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, recently I was approached by a couple friends who were going to take a trip to Italy for a little vacation, and they started asking me a lot of tech questions about traveling. And I realized that I know quite a bit about carrying gear for every day and for being productive in a business sense. And I know a little something about carrying gear to trade shows and expos and even on vacation. But I don't know nearly as much as I should about traveling overseas from the United States. So for our U.S. friends, I figured we need to consult an expert in this kind of thing. So I want to welcome back Mr. Chris Christensen from the Amateur Traveler to MacVoices. Chris, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Chuck. It's always nice to be here.
So we have some business here to take care of before we get to the topic at hand. First of all, congratulations. You just knocked out over 1,000 podcasts.
Well, 1,000 episodes, yes.
Episodes, okay. That's
took me 4 different podcasts to do it, but sometime last, I think November, December, I honestly wasn't paying attention, and then I started adding them up and went, oh, Lordy. So yeah, I do about 2.5 shows a week, so that adds up over 9.5 years.
It does. What were the 4 shows? You say it took 4 podcasts. What were the 4 shows that contributed to the 1,000?
So the most episodes I have, and the largest show by far that I do, is Amateur Traveler. So talking about travel destinations predominantly. And then I also do a second travel show called This Week in Travel, which is a roundtable discussion show talking about, I think of it as a comedy show about travel, but sometimes it's useful information and sometimes it's just fun, crazy news stories. And then I do a religious show, actually, the Bible Study Podcast. And then I do a video show of Amateur Traveler. That is the least frequently published version of any of my podcasts. I think I got out 2 of those last year. So that's the one that still gets, 200,000 downloads, but it doesn't, don't put as much work into that one.
And it's tough because video does introduce a lot of different variables and a lot more work to it. So,
right. Well, and working 3 jobs makes it a little tough to get to everything. So,
and we were talking about that pre-show. So let's clarify what the 3 jobs are too, because I find it very interesting that you have your hands in so many different things.
Yeah. So Amateur Traveler, I'm sort of lumping all of the podcasting and blogging into one job. It's either a job or a hobby, depending on who you are. If you're the IRS, it's a side job, and if you're my wife, it may be a hobby, but it does pay for itself, and then also subsidizes a lot of trips. And then I also have a startup company, a bootstrap startup company that does a site called Blogger Bridge, which connects companies with bloggers and other content creators like myself. And then to pay the bills, to actually, pay for a mortgage in Silicon Valley, I went back to work for my former employer, TripAdvisor. I used to be a director of engineering over there, and now I'm just doing some contract programming. So, and they let me work for them half-time. And since I do a lot of travel, occasionally walk in and say, I'm got this free trip that I was offered to cruise to South America. So, see you in 3 weeks. So it's kind of a wonderful deal if you can find it.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it. And again, we were talking pre-show. Blogger Bridge, for those in the audience who might have attended New Media Expo last year, was the software that was used for the speed dating sessions.
That's right. Speed networking. Yeah.
Yeah. Speed networking. Excuse me. Yeah. Speed dating.
You may have also gotten some dates out of it. I don't know, Chuck, but I think for most of us, we were just using it for networking. But.
We're not going there, Chris. That's a whole other podcast. Well, as I said at the outset, I was approached with some questions about traveling specifically to Italy and to Europe that I really,
right.
Those are the kind of things people that do it. They come from Europe over here. You have other friends that go and they kind of deal with it. And I really never thought about trying to cover that here on MacVoices. And I thought this is as good a time as any. And so I'll let you start. Is there any place in particular we should start? Because I've got questions about adapters and networking and data plans and cell phones and all that.
Well, I think, yeah, cell phones and adapters are probably the two biggest things that come up. Let's start with adapters because that's actually the easiest thing. Just the thing that Americans need to know, I don't know how much of your audience is in the US, is that we're weird. Basically, that most of the world doesn't use the same system that we use for our power. And so basically, if you leave and go to Europe or you leave and go to other parts of the world, not only will you have to have a different plug to plug into the wall, but you'll also have to deal with the fact that most of the world is 220 volts instead of 110 like we are. So, and it's important to understand that you need to convert both the voltage and the plug, because you can get a plug adapter. Those are really cheap. In fact, I think I bought them 6 at a time on eBay or something like that. And for a lot of your electronics, that actually is all you need. So for your MacBook or your, in my case, the MacBook Air or the expensive electronics, most of those will handle either 110 or 220. So all you really need to do is change the plug configuration so that you can get it in the socket, because it's a different configuration in different countries. Big, heavy plugs in UK and UK-based companies, just 2 round plugs in most of Europe. And there are the sites where you can go and you can see what you're going to need in various places. But the problem is, once you convert the plug, if you haven't taken into account the fact that the voltage is higher, that's where you can do things like I had what was the popular Zoom H2, which their particular power adapter only did 110. So I fried mine in Europe by plugging it into, I brought a power strip along too, which seemed like a really great idea, but the power strip, of course, doesn't do anything to convert voltage. So,
ouch.
Yeah, so my wife has, turned a curling iron, for instance, into a piece of molten metal before, and so that's the kind of thing you need to watch out for. Is for especially consumer electronics. If you're traveling with a hairdryer or curling iron, I say are probably the 2 most common things that I hear people, let out all the smoke. And I don't know if you know your electronics, but if they work on smoke, so if you let the smoke out, they don't work anymore.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard
that's.
It's
a complicated technical thing, but that's the way it works.
Yeah. And it sounds, Chris, like there could be a little bit of a danger here. I mean, sure, it's melting down your curling iron is not a good thing, but you also don't want to get hit with 220 either.
Yeah, no, it's the main thing to watch for is before you plug anything in, especially the first time, just look at your adapter right in the back of the adapter where you plug it into the wall. Most power adapters, especially in expensive electronics, will tell you right there what kind of voltage they handle.
Okay. How about the iPhone and iPad chargers that we all have that came with the devices? They're okay.
Yeah, those work fine. Again, expensive devices tend to be better off than consumer electronics. Your power brick for your Mac, your iPhone, those things usually work without a problem.
Okay. So if we need the 110 to 220 converter, do you have any recommendations for brands or where to go to get them other than just go to Amazon and search?
No, I don't. Yeah, there's really no particular leading brands for that. It's a pretty low-tech piece of technology. eBay, Amazon. If you forget about it, quite often right there in the airport, there's going to be some place that's selling electronics, and they'll have a current converter as well.
Until recently, I would have said Radio Shack, but that option's gone pretty much.
Well, it's going away. But yeah, that is the kind of thing you could have gotten at Radio Shack or Best Buy or something like that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so now we feel pretty good about power. Now, how about data plans and chewing up bandwidth and include, if you will, not just the data plans, but also the cell service, because that too can get you into trouble.
Well, the first thing that people need to be aware of too, and this is the thing that traditionally we used to run into, say 3-4 years ago, is that there are different standards. So, and in the U.S., for instance, traditionally, AT&T and T-Mobile used a GSM standard, for instance, while Verizon and Sprint used a CDMA standard. And CDMA is not generally available in much of the world. There's a few pockets in China that have CDMA, but what we see now is that as everybody is moving towards the new, 4G kind of things, that there's more compatibility in terms of using your phone overseas. It used to be that I had friends who had, Verizon, they had great coverage here. They went to Hong Kong, they took out the phone, and there isn't a cell tower within 1,000 miles that will understand that cell phone. So now as we go to some of the newer standards, we're running into that less. So that is something that seems to be largely going away as they're converging on the different data standards. But that's the first thing you can run into is just, will your cell phone work? And if it won't work, then if it doesn't have the radio that will connect to the cell towers, you're out of luck. At that point, you have an iPod Touch or an iPod Touch, yes. So the second thing to be aware of now with and most of the world was GSM, was one of the reasons that was the case, especially Europe. But now that you are connecting your cell phone, obviously the second thing you have to worry about, and the one that we've all heard about, is the enormous data bills that you come back with because you haven't put your phone into don't do data roaming. So, and I think this is fairly well documented, but there are people basically who've gotten $10,000 cell phone bills when they got home because the data roaming charges overseas can be quite high, especially if you do it without getting a special data plan. So you can, for instance, if you have AT&T as your provider, before you leave, you can get an overseas plan, which will help, but most of those are still at a fairly high rate. They're still not great. Now, the exception for that, for instance, is the T-Mobile plan. T-Mobile, being the fourth carrier in the U.S. and really wanting to offer something that has a differentiation, they've really gone with a plan that is a great plan for people who do a lot of traveling around the world. And they're basically throwing in a lot of world data for free in their plan. And so that's a wonderful plan that really beats the others in terms of roaming with data. Now, of course, the easiest solution to any of that is just keep your phone in airplane mode. Put it in airplane mode, which will shut off your radio, and then turn on Wi-Fi when you're in the hotel and read your emails that way and send your Instagrams when you're in the hotel and such. That's the easiest thing. And honestly, that's often what I just do. The second thing you can do is the cheapest option is usually to get a SIM card that is a local SIM. And sometimes just right there in the airport or going to a cell phone store or whatever, you can get a SIM card with a prepaid data plan that will give you more what the locals pay for data, and that's going to be a better option. The thing to be aware of there is make sure your phone is unlocked and can use another SIM. So AT&T, for instance, won't unlock your phone for the first year of your contract. So Verizon, because they used to have this problem that their phone didn't work overseas so often, they let you use other SIMs usually without a problem. They'll unlock your phone to start with. And so just make sure that if you're planning on using the option where you're buying a SIM card to put in your phone, you'd have a different phone number and you'd have a different plan. Basically, it's as if it's a completely different cell phone. You have to have it unlocked so that you can use that third-party SIM first. And there's starting to be some interesting options in terms of SIMs that are a SIM you put in your phone or you wrap your phone with, but it lets you use it in different countries and gives you a local phone number and such. There's a number of different carriers out there like that that are interesting, and none of them, unfortunately, occurring to me off the top of my head. But basically, there are options now that let you basically do almost a meta local SIM. So that basically treats your plan as if you had a local plan wherever you are. But again, you have to have your phone unlocked to do that.
Okay, wow. It's too bad there's
That's why I say the simplest option sometimes is put it in airplane mode, don't worry about getting phone calls, and that'll work. And it's usually not the phone calls, actually, that are going to kill you. The phone calls are going to be, if you did a really long phone call, that's not so bad. So sometimes just making sure that the data roaming is off is fine. And if you get a phone call, hopefully it's not somebody trying to sell you aluminum siding that you're paying high rates for. But you can, for instance, just turn on your phone and the phone calls are going to be, maybe $1 a minute or something like that. But that's not so bad if you're doing a quick phone call. Text can be something like 50 cents a minute, and that can add up really 50 cents a minute, 50 cents a text. So that can add up fairly quickly. We've also done even things where we've rented phones, although the thing to watch out for there is we did once where we did 4 countries in Europe. We flew into Frankfurt and very quickly left the country. And we got a cell phone for our daughter who was just out of high school and sent her off with one cell phone, one German cell phone. And we went off with another, but we very, very quickly in Switzerland. And so when we're in Switzerland, calling her in Switzerland on German phones, we're basically making a long distance phone call each way. And we came home and had, I think it was a $700 phone bill from all of the roaming. So something to watch out for is when you cross borders, when you do cross-country borders, you may be, incurring extra fees if you have a cell phone that is a local SIM, because it does tend to be that it's a German SIM, not a Europe SIM, or a Swiss SIM, or a French SIM, or whatever.
Actually, I was going to ask you that. Is there any benefit to just buying a burner? Or I guess a European version of a burner?
I went into a cell phone store in London, I think, one time, and picked up for £20 just a non-data, not a non-smartphone, and it was a £20 phone. Cost £20. It didn't weigh 20 pounds. Good. This wasn't back in 1965 or something like that. It cost £20 and came with 20 pounds of prepaid data. So that actually can be a good option sometimes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that we continued to use that phone until my daughter was basically studied overseas, and I sent that phone with her, and I think she dropped it too many times and didn't come back. But yeah, that can be a good option as well.
Now, the one thing we've all heard horror stories about calling the carrier and saying, hey, I'm going to Europe, I'm going to Asia, whatever, and so I need some advice on what to get. How much should they rely on that advice? Is it quality advice, and what are your recourse if they give you bad advice and you come home and find a $700 phone bill?
I haven't run into as many people who have been steered wrong by the carriers. I just think that the one thing to really take into account there is if you are going to do data through the cell system, make sure you know what you're paying for, in the sense that you may want to turn off your Dropbox synchronization or your transporter synchronization or some of those things, and and make sure that they're not happening while you're paying for cell phone, for data through the cell phone, because you're probably, even if you talk to them ahead of time, you're going to be at a higher rate. And so it can add up pretty quickly. Yeah, we run into people who, even on just their iPhones or whatever, they're like, I can't possibly have used that much data. And the problem was, it wasn't them. It was the fact that they had their downcast wasn't set to not download through the cell phone system. And so you can be surprised. And so you watch out for the things that you have that are syncing services. And I would say, leave those on only basically when you're in the Wi-Fi. And MiFi devices are another option that some people are doing, is just not doing anything except renting a MiFi device, for instance, while I'm there. And you can get those for $7 to $15 a day or something like that, depending on the plan you get. And then basically just doing everything through that device and, not worrying about your phone at all.
That sounds like a pretty good option. That sounds like a real good option.
That can be an interesting option, especially because most of us these days, how many of us really do calls on our phone so much? It's often more the data than the calling that we care about. Those of us who are big Mac geeks or other technology geeks. So,
okay, so I think we've got that covered pretty well. There's one other thing, and it'll come back to me.
And one of the MiFi devices you might check out would be XCOM, is one that I've used in the past in a couple different countries and had good experiences with.
Good, thank you. Yeah, this might be a good time. This is what I was going to say. Might be a good time just to go in, review all those settings, all those times you've said, can somebody send me push notifications, and turn them off. I mean, take a screenshot of, what you have turned on, so when you get back to the States, you can go back to the way you were. But you just don't need. I mean, you may not need traffic notifications, and you may not need some of those things. It'll take me 20 minutes to get to the office when you're in Italy. So turn those off.
The other thing to think about too is what we have done sometimes is now on your iPhone or your iPad, getting one of the applications that will do offline maps for navigation, and so that you don't have to be in the middle of Ireland trying to figure out which different dirt road you want to drive down, and trying to even pick up data which you may not be able to get reliably there anyway. And so an offline map application can be a real good example for that. There are a number out there. I don't know that I've got a favorite one right now that I have fallen in love with. I'm still trying out a couple different ones. But we're seeing more and more in the iTunes App Store that basically that will do online maps where either they come with a set of maps or you can buy a map for a particular region.
Can you throw some names out just of ones that people should at least consider recognizing that? I'm not asking you for a recommendation. I guess I'm looking for options.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I've tried a couple and I didn't like them, so I don't know that I actually can throw out any names right now. I'm still trying them out. I'm downloading a few for my next trip, which is Saturday. But yeah, no, I haven't come across one that I really like yet. They're not as good. Most of the ones that I have tried are not as good as Apple Maps or not as good as Google Maps, depending on which is your favorite map solution. Right. And we're starting to see I think Google Maps started talking about doing more offline maps as well, but that I think is still coming.
How about you mentioned hotel Wi-Fi or,
sure.
Coffee shops or whatever the equivalent is in Europe. Those kind of things always, I mean, we hear so many security warnings about those, and we're right back to it. I'm starting to think that, that while that might be good for some things, I'm not sure you want to be doing anything that's secure there. And I'm kind of liking the MiFi option.
The MiFi option has some advantages that way. There was I'm trying to remember the name of the VPN provider that was at the last Macworld that I talked to. Cloak, yes.
Cloak, yep.
I mean, that's the other option, is looking at one of the VPN providers, and I know they've got a good reputation, especially in the Mac community, in terms of, you're in the, part of the problem is, hey, look, the airport has free Wi-Fi. We have seen things where people have gone out there and they have spoofed it. Basically, that is not airport free Wi-Fi. That is somebody sitting there with their laptop. I mean, it happens. And so certainly something to think about, especially if you're planning on doing any banking or things like that, I would be I would be careful. And a VPN solution like that might be interesting. The other thing to think about in terms of VPNs, and this is working a little less than it used to, but people had been using VPNs as a way of getting around some of the, I actually am in a hotel with good Wi-Fi. I want to catch up on some of the shows for Netflix or something like that. They were using Wi-Fi VPN to get around that, although some of those providers are now blocking VPN because of that. But there's also a few providers that you can use. For instance, if you go to China and you're trying to get around the Great Firewall of China, there are some solutions that are basically VPN based that will let you get around those.
Okay.
But all of them are going to be hit and miss. They may work today and they may not.
How about Ethernet connectivity in the hotels? Do you find that's just like here in the U.S. kind of a thing of the past for so many of them, or is it worth taking an adapter along and trying to plug in, or does that introduce its own set of issues?
I don't think it introduces that many issues. I am seeing it less than I used to, for sure. And the site I was thinking of for the Great Firewall of China, by the way, is Securitales. Securitales.com is the one that I used when I was in China. Yeah, no, with Ethernet, I think a lot of things are going to Wi-Fi in the hotels, but there definitely going to be some hotels, especially a business class hotel, is going to be more likely to have an Ethernet jack still. The oddest thing, and this is true in Europe and it's true to a degree in the U.S. as well, is the more you pay for the hotel, the more likely it is that you're not going to get free Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that doesn't.
And that the quality of what you get is going to be poor. If you stay in a hostel, you're much more likely to have a good, fast internet connection. And if you stay in, a boutique hotel, it's more likely. If you stay in a chain hotel or a Western style hotel, you're probably going to have an additional charge for bad Wi-Fi.
Take a student along.
Yeah. And there's some interesting quirks in different countries. In Italy, for instance, you have to register to use Wi-Fi, to use the internet basically anywhere in the country, and that's something they're using to crack down on crime, on organized crime. And so don't be too surprised if when you go into an internet cafe, you need to register in some countries. And Italy is one that I know that has that because that's the rule, that's the law. The other interesting trick is if you're in an immigrant neighborhood. If you're in Paris, for instance, and you happen to be in one of the neighborhoods that is a little further out or that has an immigrant population, you're going to be much more likely to find good cyber cafes, especially with Skype built in and things like that, because you've got people who are needing to get in contact with home. So sometimes the not quite upscale neighborhood is going to be more likely to have a better internet cafe option.
Go back for a second and define register. What does this mean? You have to show your passport? You just have to give your name and address? What?
No, you'd have to show your passport.
Really?
But remember, if you're in Europe, anytime you check in, you're showing your passport. In fact, you're leaving your passport typically for a couple hours is the traditional way that happened. I don't see that quite as much anymore, but you have to register when you show into most hotels as well.
So I want to be real clear on this. So if I walk into a Wi-Fi cafe, they are going to ask for my passport in Italy. Yeah, they're going to ask for my passport.
Some sort of identification. And in your case, a passport. Yeah.
Will they photocopy it or write it down or take it or?
I don't recall. I don't think I've been there since they passed that law.
Okay, that's interesting. This edition of Mac Voices is sponsored by lynda.com, the unparalleled online video training library. The new year is here. Okay, the new year's been here for about a month. What did you do with that month? If you'd been using lynda.com, you could have learned all sorts of new things. Maybe picked up some expertise in photography. Maybe upped your game in the web development area and spruced up your website. Or maybe figured out a little more about just what you should be doing with social media. Those are all courses that are available at lynda.com, and they're just the start. Business, design, software training on a huge number of programs, and more. And the great thing about lynda.com is that once you subscribe, you can watch and learn as much as you want. No limitations. If you're under deadline and need expertise in something, you could watch 24 hours a day to get to where you need to be. Pick what you want to learn, and then take it a step at a time, or do a deep dive. It's all up to you. But don't take my word for it. You can get a 10-day free trial by visiting lynda.com/MacVoices, and that will let you explore any and all of the videos on lynda.com for free. Again, no limits, no restrictions, just pure, solid learning for 24 hours straight, if you can stay awake that long. Some of my favorites are from some friends who share their knowledge via lynda.com. Experts like Christopher Breen and his new macOS Yosemite Tips and Tricks course. Or Derek Story and his Managing Your Mobile Photos course. Or Deke McClellan and his ongoing Deke's Techniques series that will help you become the graphics master you've always wanted to be. And you can watch when, where, and how you want, Mac, iPad, or iPhone. lynda.com has all the options covered. If you want to learn something, and I mean really learn it, I'll bet you'll find it on lynda.com. Do us both a favor and sign up for the 10-day free trial at lynda.com/MacVoices and give it a try. I bet you'll become addicted to how easy it is to learn and how much fun it is to learn. That's lynda.com/MacVoices for a 10-day free trial, no restrictions, no limitations. Thanks to lynda.com for their support of Mac Voices. That's very interesting. Again, this all sort of gels together. How about recommendations for travel apps, specifically for U.S. citizens going overseas? Is it pretty much the same travel apps we always recommend, or with
travel app for what purpose?
Well, that's kind of up to you. I mean, obviously they're they're the touristy kind of things that will tell you where to go and what to see. But
Right.
as a geek, I'm thinking more, anything that would help me be a geek in Europe.
Well, you're going to see different in Europe, for instance. Hotels are not as available, for instance, on Expedia as they are in some of the European booking engines like Booking.com. Bookings.com, for instance, is bigger in Europe than Expedia is, especially in countries like Spain. And so which apps you use, if you haven't booked all your hotels tonight, you may try a couple different sites than you would. For instance, Venere happens to be a site that I like when I'm over in Europe, that will find both hotel rooms as well as some apartment options and things like that. So you'll find different providers are stronger in different places, which may lead you to use different apps if you're booking travel. For getting around in logistics, TripIt is still one of my favorite apps in terms of just keeping track of travel, especially for those of us who, literally have been known to wake up in the hotel room and go, what city am I in? I did one trip last year. I think it was a 5-week trip, and I think I was in a dozen different cities. And so, TripIt, where I don't know if everybody in your audience knows that basically when you get an email from the airline, you can just forward it to plans@tripit.com. If you have even a free account with TripIt, you don't even have to necessarily get a paid account to do that. And then it will keep track of all of your itineraries. It will keep track of, where your flights are, when do they go. And so my wife also uses it to keep track of what city I'm in now, and I put my hotel reservations in there as well, just to stay sane. With a pro version, you can also get warnings, for instance, that this particular flight is delayed, and here's a link to go book a different flight or something like that, or canceled. Worse yet. So that's one of my favorite travel apps. The translation apps are getting more and more interesting, although I haven't tended to use them live. But obviously, the live translation apps, I think, they're not quite the universal translator we want them to be, but they're sure darn interesting and heading in that direction. I don't know that I tend to be one of those people who studies the language instead, but one of the apps, for instance, that's worth a look is where did I put that one? Oh, Gate Guru, by the way, is another favorite app in terms of just I'm in a different airport and I'm about to go through security. Should I eat before I go through? Are there good options on the other side of the security? Just sort of things are the things that you can figure out with Gate Guru. Oh, Chuck, what was the name of the travel translation app that you could point at a different sign and it would translate it?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, everyone was talking about it for a while. Say Hi was one of the translation apps I was thinking of, but that's not the one that I'm thinking of there. But yeah, take a look at some of those. Even the Google Translate app is interesting, and those are starting to get to be more useful. Although a lot of them do require a data service.
Right.
So they're not going to work as well if you're on airplane mode. There's starting to be a few different services out there as well that are concierge translation services. If you look for those in Google, basically you'll find things that you can get someone on the phone, or basically you can hand your phone to the person who you're trying to understand, and they can speak into it, and then basically you can get per minute translation services available that way. So, with smartphones and things like that, there's just all sorts of cool different options available in terms of travel that we hadn't thought of before.
Chris, what kind of reaction do the locals have when you type something into your phone and then hold it up and the phone speaks to them? Are they sitting there thinking, what a gringo, or is it pretty well accepted?
It's going to depend where you are. I haven't done it, so that's not something that I have tried. But I think you're going to find that in general, how well people are accommodating to you if you don't speak their language is going to depend a little bit on the size of the country, for one thing. For instance, if you're in Holland, nobody expects that you learned Dutch. because there just really aren't that many people in Holland. And so if you're listening to the radio, half the songs are already in English, and everybody's English is wonderful. Sweden, the same way, Luxembourg and some of those places. In Paris, they can occasionally take attitude about you not learning French, and it's their language, it's their country. So you just have to put up with that. I mean, Paris is to France as New York is to the U.S. So just take things accordingly. But it really depends on the country a bit and how much they are used to tourism. If you're in a tourism destination, if you're checking in, they're not going to bat an eye. First of all, they're probably going to speak English anyway, but because that tends to be the universal language for travel now. And I don't know the last time that I went through a passport control and had to speak anything other than English. And I have studied a few different languages, but quite often the people in passport control speak English and the local language. So yeah, for hotels, for restaurants, it's probably not, it's not going to be a problem at all.
Okay.
And there's always still, tourism charades anyway. So,
and one thing, I don't care where you are. Smile when you're asking for help. I mean, it sounds hokey, but it really does. If people think you're demanding about something, that's never going to work. But if you're smiling and trying to do the charade thing, it comes off a lot better.
Yeah, I found that the last thing that I forget in any language is I don't speak your language very well, and that phrase alone will sometimes open doors because I have made the effort to be able to understand that. Of course, sometimes they will not take you seriously if you say that. They will hear you say that, especially if your accent is good for that, and they'll just launch right into.
And then you're saying, "Stop, please, help
Io
me."
parlo italiano non molto bene. So it doesn't always work.
Chris, how about all the little? We'll get away from some of the automation here, but how about some of the gadgets that we see? One I know that I was specifically asked about are the RFID wallets and the protect and forget. And it's like, okay, and I don't know. I mean, it's a legitimate question because we see so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt on TV.
Well, actually, that leads into credit cards too. We should talk about that. So in terms of RFID wallets, I'm not necessarily in the aluminum foil hat realm in terms of RFID, but you should be aware that the newer passports do include RFID information. And so there, for instance, are RFID shields, basically a Faraday cage for your passport that basically keeps you from broadcasting that information until you open up the passport at passport control, because really you don't need to be sharing that with anybody else. And so that's the RFID wallets are the same sort of idea. They're not a bad idea. They certainly aren't going to cause any problems. I don't know how much they're really an issue. Most credit card fraud these days, as I read it, is from skimmers, putting something on the front of the ATM machine or stealing credit card numbers, which apparently, somebody is doing in massive amounts every day, and then just reselling those. Those tend to be the number one places, as far as I can see, that those things are happening. So, going out there and looking for people's information, through some sort of RFID thing, it can happen. I don't think that it's the number one thing I worry about. But we should talk about credit cards, though, because there is an interesting wrinkle. We are still using the mag stripe on credit cards in the U.S., and that is largely gone away in other parts of the world, especially in Europe. And so if you can, it would be useful to get a credit card with a chip. So for those of you on the video feed, here's my Sapphire, and you can see that there is a chip in there. And Europe is going to the chip and has gone years ago to the chip and pin system. We still have the stripe and sign system, right? They swipe your credit card and then you sign the credit card sheet. You will run into problems these days, even with the newer U.S. credit cards that have a chip. You probably don't yet have a PIN and therefore won't be able to use it at places that are automated. You will have problems using it, for instance, trying to fill up at an automated gas station when there is no attendant, because a U.S. credit card will not work. And occasionally, for instance, I flew into Paris late at night, and all of the manned windows were closed. And to get into the city, you can either take a cab, which is more expensive, or you can take the train. But for the train, it will only take a European credit card. And later on this year, I'm told that Chase and some of the American banks will provide PINs for their credit cards that have the smart chip. And so we're heading in the direction of we're closing the technology gap so that you can get a card that you will be able to use elsewhere. Usually, if you can find a manned kiosk, you're not going to have a problem at all. They're going to be able to swipe your credit card. I did run into last February. I was in a Deutsche Bahn train station, and I walked up to the person who was standing there, and she said, I don't have the machine to swipe something. They only could do something with a chip. So increasingly, if you are traveling abroad, especially to Europe, get a chip if you can. And when they come out with chip and PIN at your local bank, definitely get that. And preferably get a card like this. This is the Chase Sapphire card. It has no international transaction fees. So there's no additional charge to charge something with this for changing currencies. And so that's something that's useful to know if you're traveling.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of on the same tact, I guess, is cash. When you run into these problems, is cash still good, still accepted?
Cash is still good, and I really never change cash at an airport. I usually just go to an ATM. I mean, I never go to the currency exchange. I just walk up to an ATM machine and change cash that way. Make sure your password, your PIN, is only 4 characters, though. There are some European, in particular, machines which are limited. They won't do a longer PIN than 4 characters. I think that's still the case there. So as long as you have that and you're on one of the major systems, you just walk up to an ATM, you get out cash, you're good to go. So that really is easier. I haven't traveled with traveler's checks, for instance, in a decade. I think they're a waste of money and waste of time. People don't even want to see them.
Do they still even make them? I didn't.
Oh yeah, you
really?
can still get them.
Oh.
Yeah, you can still get them. And if you're going to get them at AAA. If you have a AAA account, and you can get them without fees. But I don't think people really want to see traveler's checks.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's a lot of places that are more cash based, in fact, than we are. Including Western Europe, there are places where they would much rather see cash than deal with a credit card. We tend to be, I don't know about you, but cash is not something that I tend to use very much at all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I wanted to ask about it, and how it relates to some of the things, because I almost would get, just like traveling anywhere, and you're more used to it than I am, but you're a little hesitant just where you're going to stick that credit card in. But cash, right, you always know what cash is going to, where it's going to go and how it's going to come back.
Right, so. Right. But yeah, no, it's usually, I very seldom have run into any issues getting cash. I think once in Africa, in Tanzania, they run out of cash in the afternoons. They don't put enough cash in the cash machine, so you need to go early in the morning. Other than that, and if you get cash in downtown in those areas, like in Arusha, Tanzania, there are people who know that you're getting cash, and so they're going to try and sell you stuff just hovering around the cash machine. But other than that, ATMs really are a good option for that. And if you go inside one of the banks, one of the ATMs inside the banks, that's a great way to do it and be a little more circumspect in terms of that you just got cash out of the machine, and don't get out $1,000 like we've heard the stories of people who got mugged in Rio de Janeiro because of traveling with $1,000. Because just get it out in smaller amounts. Get it out at $100 or less.
Yeah, pay the fee and just accept it.
Exactly.
It's insurance. Chris, this is exactly the kind of thing I was hoping we'd get into. There's just so many little tips and tricks that, having traveled the way you have, you can give us ideas about things that, frankly, there are a number of things you've already brought up I wouldn't have thought of. And anything else we should warn people about or recommend to them or tell them they definitely should take or shouldn't take?
In terms of warning people about, the first thing I would say is, it's probably, especially if you watch the nightly news, travel is much safer than you'd think. Because remember that basically if it bleeds, it leads. So, all you're hearing is the bad news. You're not hearing about every single plane that landed safely and all of the tourists who, traveled safely and such. Your biggest risk, remember, when you're traveling is going to be if you're if you're a victim of a crime, it's probably going to be a pickpocket. So, think about, especially in like Rome or one of those cities that's particularly notorious, Naples, for sure, might think about a money belt or a pouch or something like that to, basically just keep as much money as you need for the day and keep it a little more circumspect. But, you're not going to be mugged, most likely. You're probably safer there than in most U.S. cities, especially from violent crime. They're just much less common, unfortunately, outside the U.S. than it is in the U.S. And even when people were afraid of going to Mexico, I think the deals were that right now it is safer to go to even the border cities in Mexico in terms of violent crime than it is our nation's capital. So don't be afraid to travel by any means. There are a lot of people traveling safely, but do look both ways when you cross the street. You're much more likely to be in a car accident. Just as here, you're much more, at risk from automobile accidents and traffic issues than you are from anything else. So especially when you're in London, there's a reason why they say, look left on the street. There is, you're always going to look the wrong direction by force of habit. So.
No, that's true. I hadn't thought about that.
Or look right. Sorry, got the wrong way.
Yeah, hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Look both ways. Just be sure.
Yeah, but look both ways. Then you don't have to worry about where you are, especially if you're jet lagged.
Yeah. I think that kind of covers everything I wanted to make sure we touched on, and in fact beyond. Again, any apps, well, go back to gadgets for a second. Any other gadgets? Sure. You mentioned Money Belt. Anything else that you particularly just won't leave home without it?
I think, at this point, my, iPad, iPhone, and MacBook Air are my, the only gadgets that I really won't leave home without. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I have in my kit. Just some plugs and currency converters. That's about it. Your iPad load it up with all your books and load your iPhone up with all the podcasts. You got lots of entertainment for those long plane rides. So no, I don't. I think I travel with less gear than I used to because so much is being consumed, subsumed by Apple devices now. I really don't travel with a whole lot of other things. I still do travel with an SLR camera, especially for what I do, but I used to travel with up to 6 cameras, so
And now, you've got the SLR and the iPod,
the SLR and the iPhone,
iPhone. Sorry, yeah.
I got the iPad too, but I'm not one of those people who holds up even the iPad Mini and tries to use it like a camera. But it works well, but you look silly. But.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people that do it. And I still contend that it's got this really great viewfinder on it. I think that's why people love it.
It does indeed.
Good. Well, Chris, thank you so much for the time and the great advice. A lot of great information there. Really appreciate it. Now let's see. Saturday, as we record this, Saturday, you're off to where?
South America, doing a cruise from Buenos Aires to Santiago, Chile. So around the Horn and through the Straits of Magellan.
Tough duty there, Chris.
It's a dirty, thankless job, but somebody's got to do it, Chuck.
Well, and folks, if you want to see the results of Chris's dirty, thankless job, amateurtraveler.com. Got that right?
Amateurtraveler.com.
Yeah, go and check it out. Again, lots of good information, and you get to enjoy the benefits of Chris's work, and maybe be a little jealous at the same time. Last thing, any social media presences or anything? Where can folks find you and follow you?
I am almost everywhere on social media, quite often Chris2X, so at Twitter, Chris2X, or Amateur Traveler, depending on how verbose you want me to be. Chris2X is more verbose than that, but you can also find me on Pinterest and everything else. At Amateur Traveler, up in the upper right-hand corner has links to everything.
Great. So. And, of course, I'll have links in the show notes, too, as well. Chris, thanks again, and safe travels.
Well, thank you.
We'll talk to you again soon. I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Thanks to Chris for sharing all that great information, and we will be back again soon. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting MacVoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.